During the time of ancient Greeks, when they spoke one language, oral stories gave way to written works. Some of the greatest literature from ancient Greeks developed into poetry. First there was epic poetry, and not too long after, lyric poetry developed. Although both types are very different, they both give us a unique look at ancient Greeks. This video will examine both types of poetry, giving us a look at ancient Greek poetry.
In this video, we will be looking specifically at the history of epic poetry, the famous epic poet Homer, a couple of famous epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, what makes up an epic poem, and the significance of epic poetry, as well as the history of lyric poetry. The famous lyric poet Sappho and Pindar, what makes up a lyric poem, and the significance of lyric poetry. It will end in a summary of epic versic lyric poetry and a conclusion. Hopefully you will learn and appreciate this great type of literature from the ancient Greeks.
The world's oldest written narratives are epic poetry by ancient Greeks. As seen on the map, Greece was surrounded by neighboring countries who they battled frequently, and Greece was surrounded by water where some of the battles occurred. The battles became the subject of the first written epic poetry. The ancient Greeks credit Homer as their greatest epic poet. Homer, as seen in the statue, is the author of the two greatest epic poems of all time, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Little is known about Homer's life because he lived so long ago, but it is said that he was blind. His contributions to epic poetry are so great that sometimes epic poetry is referred to as Homeric poetry. Homer is the greatest epic poet of ancient Greece and perhaps of all time. But what is an epic poem? An epic poem is a long poem that tells a story in verse. It usually includes a hero with superhuman qualities and goes on an amazing adventure. The Iliad was the first of Homer's epic poems. It is a story set during the Trojan War and details battles of this war. The hero is Achilles. Many gods and goddesses appear throughout this work, which is very characteristic of epic poems. The picture shows what the original work may have looked like. The Odyssey is often referred to as the sequel to the Iliad. This epic poem tells of the main character, Odysseus, and his journey home after the fall of Troy. It also has a hero with superhuman characteristics, and the gods help him through his journey. The picture shows the cover of one of the publications of this work. Epic poetry has many characteristics. Epic poems usually have a setting covering many lands. They usually begin in media res, which means in the middle of the action, and they begin by stating the theme of the poem. Epic poems also have verses in dialectic hexameter. They incorporate epithets, which are repetitive phrases, and feature long speeches by the characters. Finally, they represent the civilization they are created after. In general, they are long works with great adventure. Epic poetry has been around for a long time and shows us the beliefs of the ancient Greeks. They give us insight into some of their battles too. Epic poetry has inspired other great works throughout time. Modern-day adaptations of the great epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are still being produced today.
Although epic poetry remains well known, lyric poetry is seen to be the most common type of literature, as they both are described as two of the most shared forms of poetry. Eventually, the Greeks got tired of the epic's high drama and elevated style that they turned to lyric poetry. Lyric poetry took its name from the lyre, which is a stringed instrument used to accompany the narration of these poems. Lyric poems are brief, often written for a specific occasion, as they were made to express one's inner thoughts and feelings. Sappho is one of the most famous Greek lyric poets. Sappho lived on the Aegean island of Lesbos around 600 BCE. She was a leader of a circle of women who were devoted to music and poetry. Most of her poems speak passionately to younger members of the group. Lyric poems are short, typically with one narrator who shares personal feelings and emotions. Generally, lyric poets rely on personal experiences, close relationships, and descriptions of their feelings as their material. The central content of lyric poems is not the story or interaction between the characters, but the poet's feelings and personal views. These poems were written to be sung with a lyre playing in the background. Lyric poems in the early language almost always rhymed, which Here is a quick fragment of a famous lyric poem created by Sappho. And I, for one, would rather listen to your soft step and see your radiant face than watch all the dazzling horsemen and armored hoplites of Lydia. Here is another example of a famous lyric poet from ancient Greece. His name was Pindar. An example of one of his famous poem fragments is water is best, and gold, like a blazing fire in the night, stands out supreme of all lordly wealth. But if, my heart, you wish to sing of contest, look no further for any star warmer than the sun, shining by day through the lonely sky, and let us not proclaim any contest greater than the Olympia. Lyric poems consist of expressing the thoughts and emotions from within the poet. Sometimes only a brief poem, it remains expressing the evolution of thoughts and feelings. The lyric was a poem written to be sung, accompanied by a lyre. As previously stated, the significance of lyric poetry is the emotional attachment that is brought along with expressing one's thoughts and feelings.
Listening to each of these types of poetry in Greek really gives a good feel for the appeal of this type of literature to the Greeks. The following is a sample of what an epic poem sounded like. This example is of the Iliad by Homer. Notice the harsh sound and expression in this poem. It clearly sets the tone for the heroic exploits that take place. There is rhyming incorporated and it is set to harsh music. Here is the clip.
Achilleus, Uluminan Myriakaios algetake, Ullaus diptimus psychasai diproiapsin, Aroon autus de hiloria teuce kinessin, Oionoisite.
Next is a clip that allows you to hear a lyric poem. The lyric poem in this audio is Olympia by Pindar. Notice how lyric poetry is less harsh and have lines in free verse, but there is no definite rhythm and beat to the piece. Here is the clip.
Da et laga ruin elde ai pilonetor, vecet aelius scope, allot alp notoranen hamerai, paennon astrone remastiae terros, med Olympias sagona perteron audasomen. Otinopolypatos hymnos amphibaletai, sopon me dies siceladen, chronupaide.
Both of these audio clips really help to show the differences between the two types of literature. Epic poetry is longer, has a main character, and involves a lot of action. Lyric poetry is shorter, is in verses, and deals with a lot of topics. In the end, the ancient Greeks are known for both epic and lyric poetry. It is amazing how two very different types of poetry were very popular during this time. Both of these types of poems are still impacting literature all across the world. The themes, styles, and motifs are even copied in literature in America today. Epic and lyric poetry are ultimately literature that is worth knowing about.